Pete Townshend, Off the Record with Mary Turner, brought to you by Budweiser, the king of beers. For all you do, this Bud's for you. And the U.S. Army, a great place to be all you can be. Pete Townshend, Off the Record.
Do you remember the first time you ever heard music and you said, I mean, it suddenly hit you down like the hand of God and went, oh, yes, this is absolutely it. Because I do for me. And I remember the absolute song, and it was on a jukebox in the drugstore, and it was I Want You, I Need You, I Love You by Elvis. And I went, geez, Louise, what is this? And I must have been 6 or 7 years old, and it just knocked me out.
What actually happened to me was slightly different. When I was a kid, I used to be in the Sea Scouts, and we went out one day on the River Thames in a motorboat, and it had an outboard motor, a very old cranky outboard motor, and it was droning away. And while it was droning away, I heard all this music come from the sound of it, and it kind of blissed me out, is the only way I can describe it. And when they switched the motor off at the end, I just went crazy. I burst into tears, and I wanted them to put it back on again, and I just wanted to hear that music again that I heard. And I guess that what I've been trying to do musically, not lyrically, but musically, ever since that day, is try to recreate and approach that sound.
Peter Dennis Blandford Townshend. He's supplied 2 generations with anthems, battle cries, and ballads. He's composer-in-residence for The Who, the man who elevated the trashing of guitars to an art form. He's a writer, musician, husband, father, philosopher, and seeker. I'm Mary Turner, and this is Pete Townshend, Off the Record.
I got a guitar for my 11th birthday, or 12th birthday, I can't quite remember which. And up to then, I'd only really played the mouth organ. My father was a musician, but we didn't have a piano, and we didn't have a record player. So my only exposure to music was watching his band, which was like a Glenn Miller kind of band. Carried over, it started in the Air Force and it carried over.
Your mom was a musician also?
Yeah, she sang with my dad's band up until the end of the war.
Is that how they met?
Yeah.
It's like Ozzie and Harriet.
Yeah.
It is. You've described your mom in some articles I've read as a cowboy, which I can't help but relate to. All the best cowboys have Chinese eyes.
Well, my mother's family is very different to my father's family. My father is very self-possessed. He's about 65 now, my father. Still works a little bit, but he can't look like a day over 50. I mean, he's got eternal youth. My mother has kind of gone the opposite way. She's like really thrown herself into life and other people's problems apart from her own. She's a real high-strung, crazy lady who just somehow everybody loves her, but she really burns both, you know, burns all over all the time. And I've often felt that I've been oscillating between the two. You know, sometimes I feel very much like my dad, able to handle things and able to smoothly carry along and rely on my sense of humour. And other times I feel very driven towards the kind of life that my mother leads, you know, very much throw yourself into the world's. And I'm still very much influenced by my parents. It was because my mother decided to stop drinking early last year that I did. She came to stay with me for about 3 months. And I was living away from my family, and it was really nice to have my mother there. And we kind of worked at it together for a bit, you know.
It must be very hard for you to differentiate your life as a musician, as a, you know, star, as an influential person, as opposed to your life as a daddy and a husband. It's different, isn't it?
Well, it's different, and it's not really entirely my problem, is it? It's the problem of the people around me to some extent. It's a problem that my wife has to deal with and my kids have to deal with. And they've dealt with it a lot better than I have most of the time.
Hard for them?
I think it has been, yeah. I met my wife when I was 17 years old. We got married when I was 21. And the fact that I'm still married to her and still love her, I think it's a miracle.
Me too.
Yeah, so...
She must be a very special lady.
Yeah, she's great. Well, she's all right. I mean, she's got some faults. Can we talk about her faults?
No, absolutely not. I wanted to ask you about your sort of this kind of when you play the guitar, either clockwise or counterclockwise. Is that something that you...
Both ways. I can do it both ways.
I've noticed that. something that just came naturally, or did you work that out?
No, I stole it from Keith Richard.
Really?
Yeah, I saw him do it. He doesn't remember doing it, but I saw him do it. And when I was 16, I saw him do it, and I stole it. I've been doing it ever since. It's my homage to Blood Change.
The guitar and pen of Pete Townshend, next, Off the Record. I'm Mary Turner.
It's obviously easy to get into a state of mind where you can even believe that words are important when they're not. You know?
Do you think words are not important in rock and roll songs?
I think they're important in rock and roll songs. Yeah, I just meant, you know, talking about problems. I think that words are important in rock and roll songs because people do live with them for a long time in the various shapes and forms. And I think sometimes it does help people to deal with something that they might not otherwise have dealt with. I don't know, I mean, I can only go by the kind of letters I get. When I first heard Dylan, I did actually realise, I don't know how, but I realised that there was a way that I could work as a writer. Almost like a sneak thief. I could use the rock form, or as I regarded it then, the pop form, to say very special personal things, that I could get ideas across through the medium that the band was working at, however big or small the band were or were to become, that I could get my say somehow as a writer. I think there's a kind of a vengeance there which is difficult to contest, that a lot of people are satisfied to get up in front of that audience and play and be cheered and be popular and be paid for the privilege. That's not enough for me. I want all that, and I want the right to say my piece.
You're terribly driven by needing to write, aren't you?
Yeah, I think if you're a writer, you need to write. If you're a good writer, it's because you need to write. You're not a good writer because you sit and go through the motions. You know, nobody can educate you into the process of writing. It has to be something which you have to do. You have to need to be judged. You have to need to be responded to. You have to need your ideas to be shared. If you're completely self-contained, if you're an autonomous human being, and you sit behind the typewriter and you write fiction, then, in a word, you never get rich and famous. You know, you'll always be a name on the spine of a book, along with another 1,000 names on the spine of a book. But if you get up at that typewriter, or whatever it is, and you just have something inside you that you've got to get out, and that you try to disguise in fiction, but the general public see you there, hear you cry out, hear you scream for reaction, that's what makes a great writer.
1970 was an important year for Pete Townshend. He released his first solo album, and he made an 8,000-mile pilgrimage to the tomb of Mayor Baba in India. When we come back, Pete talks about the influence Baba has had on his life and his music. Off the Record. The physical, mental, and spiritual powers of rock and roll coming up next on Pete Townshend, Off the Record. Turner.
I know that you're a very spiritual man, and I'll tell you something really honestly. When I heard, after I saw you in San Francisco, about 1970 or so, I was very interested in reading about Mayor Baba, so I called up your friend over somewhere in the South Bay. Is it
Rick Chapman?
Yeah, Rick. Yeah. A lovely person. He sent me millions of books, and I read all that stuff. And they're very inspirational, and I know that must have that bears a big part of your life, your spiritual aspirations with Baba. How were you turned on to him? Were you acquainted with him?
I was introduced to him by a friend in Britain, and it was, again, loosely a drug-related event. I got very disenchanted with hallucinogenic drugs after the Monterey Pop Festival. I decided that I was going to straighten out, and I did straighten out. I didn't use drugs from 1967. I mean any drugs, nothing, until 1980. I was a Christian, and I loved Jesus in a very personal way, but the church, as far as I was concerned, I mean, I'd been through, singing in the school choir and stuff like that, and didn't have a religious family, but felt like I was probably the most religious person in the family. And I felt touched, personally touched in some way by Christ. But I didn't feel I'd ever be able to find what I wanted, any answers from the establishment church. And when I read about Meher Baba and read that he was he was an Indian mystic, but at the same time he suggested that you kept your own religion, that really appealed to me a lot, because I didn't have to lose, I didn't have to say, oh, Jesus is not who he said he was, this other guy is. That's one of the things that has always really... Meher Baba did say that he was the avatar, which means the Christ. And there's a lot of other people said that too. And that was something that didn't hit me at first. It was something I had to later come to terms with.
When I think of Baba, I think of don't worry, be happy. A very good thing to say, but difficult to live by.
Yeah, very difficult. In fact, that's only half the quote. It was, don't worry, be happy, I will help you. And I think that's true. I think that, that life is too complicated. Nobody can do it on their own. Don't worry, be happy. I mean, it's, that is important, because that's how you appear to the outside world. I don't think you're any good to people if you're continually maudlin or wrapped up in your own problems. I'm not saying that you should never look for help to the people around you. That's the first thing that you should do, is never be too proud to go to a friend and say, listen, help me out, give me a hand, I'm screwed up, or, I feel I'm on the brink, or whatever, or this problem's too big. But at the same time, you should never be defeated, because really your destiny is not really in your hands. I'm not very receptive to the Indian idea of karma as a kind of a fatalistic approach to life. I'm very much a Westerner. I think if things aren't right, you can change them. You can fight and you can get things done if you work hard enough at it. And that's why I'm such a great believer and proponent in the rock and roll industry. I think that rock and roll is entertainment first, but it's also jungle juice next. It can actually change things. It can help people. I suppose to some extent, it can get them happy. Whereas rock and roll has been indirectly or directly responsible for the demise of a lot of individuals. I should say that with my faith in it has probably been what's helped me to stay alive. I don't know.
Are you still as spiritual as you seem to have been maybe 10 years ago? Are you still as much of a seeker, or do you feel you've found what you're seeking?
I'm not interested in the romance anymore. I'm interested in the reality now. And I feel that for a long time I thought the honeymoon was over, but now I know the honeymoon is over. The spiritual path is not either the Chinese word game that Hermann Hesse thought it was, neither is it the romance of Siddhartha. All those things are very nice and very poetic. I think it's more really just living life day to day. So I would hope that I can still maintain a spiritual focus. But I would look more to daily life to give me the answers to any questions that I might have. And if it wasn't capable of giving the answers to the questions I was asking, I would not look any further. I would just say, right, there is no answer to that question. I wouldn't then say, right, where do I look now? How hard do I have to pray? I feel a great responsibility, in a sense, to redeem myself, not before God, I know He forgives me, but before some of the other people that I think I've let down. Strangely enough, it's not guilt that I feel. It's more a feeling of like wanting to just go back to the old way and prove, in a sense, that it is possible to get through a serious problem, to get through. All right, so some people think that being in a big rock and roll band is a dream come true, and other people might realise that it's also fraught with great danger, but I think it's possible to come through that and come out of it sane, and come out of it straight.
Pete Townshend, Off the Record with Mary Turner, has been brought to you by Budweiser, the king of beers. For all you do, this Bud's for you. And the U.S. Army, a great place to be all you can be. This special program was written and produced by Marcia Richardson. Production and engineering by Ron Harris. Off the Record with Mary Turner is a presentation of Westwood One. Executive producer, Norm Pattis.
Somebody say